Welcome everyone. We'll start today's webinar shortly. We're just waiting for a few more to get logged in to the webinar. Hi, welcome to this webinar from CIPS Australia and New Zealand. My name is Charlotte Payne and I'm your host for today, and I'm going to be joined by Anna Laity from New Zealand and Gareth Williams from Australia. This webinar is for those who are interested in how studying CIPS professional qualifications can support your career and support you in your job role, ultimately to help you with your professional development. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we all meet today, and by paying my respects to elders past and present. For those who are joining us from New Zealand, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. First, I'm going to take you through our Zoom keeping for today. The session is being recorded so that we can share that recording with everyone who's registered after the session, and we'll follow up with a survey to complete after this session. We've got a number of CIPS colleagues who are mingling in the virtual audience today, so please do use your chat facility to say hi, give them a shout out, let us know where you're from, and it'd be great to hear from you. We will be taking questions to put to our panel experts towards the end of the session. So if you think of any questions during the session that you would like either myself or Anna and Gareth to talk to you about, please do submit them using the Q&A facility as we move through. So today's agenda for this session around qualifications is to really look at CIPS professional qualifications, how they can support you in your role and ultimately support your career. I'll then give a bit of an overview around CIPS professional qualifications, what are they, and some things that you might want to consider if you are thinking about beginning your studies. As I've said, Anna and Gareth will join us. They're going to share with you their experience of studying CIPS professional qualifications, and then we'll move through to a Q&A session with our panel, and we'll take the questions from the audience then. Okay, so firstly, let's look at how the qualifications can support your career. And what we're going to do is just move into our first poll question so we can understand a little bit about who we have in the virtual room today. So the poll should appear on your screen. If you could just take a moment to tell us a bit about yourself. Are you thinking about getting into procurement? Are you already in procurement and perhaps interested in study options? Are you already studying? You're part qualified. Or are you here on behalf of others? Are you interested in the study options for members of your procurement team? Thanks for completing the survey. It looks like we have a majority winner with around 58% of you working in procurement and interested in your study options. But we've also got quite a few who are already studying and part qualified. So it'd be great to hear from their experience as well. Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how professional qualifications can ultimately support your career. But firstly, let me introduce the concept of MCIPS Chartered Professional and talk to you a little bit about what that stands for and what the professional designation MCIPS really means. So MCIPS is a professional designation. It is awarded following a process by which an individual demonstrates that they have achieved a certain level of competence to perform a particular role. And in the case of MCIPS, that role is very much procurement and supply management. So MCIPS is awarded to individuals who have attained and proven a high level of competency and skills, and that level is at honours degree level. So MCIPS is not a degree, It is actually more than a degree because it is a professional designation, and it resonates with those who are committed to furthering their proficiency. But it is awarded to those who have evidenced degree level competence in procurement and supply. Equally, individuals also have to demonstrate that they have 3 years relevant business experience in procurement and supply. And all CIPS members sign up to a code of conduct, which really makes a statement about how they commit to practice procurement in their roles. So MCIPS is predicated on those 3 things: high-level proficiency, relevant experience, and commitment to ethics. The notation Chartered Professional is for those who commit to ethics through the ethical certificate. So they commit to actually refreshing that every year. And they also commit to lifelong learning through doing CPD or continuing professional development hours each year. So once MCIPS has been awarded, you can achieve and also retain Chartered Professional as a complementary status to the MCIPS professional designation through completing the annual ethical certificate and annually submitting your CPD record. CIPS' role as the professional body is to ensure that we have a number of different pathways through to achieving MCIPS. Today, I'm really going to focus very much on how, if you're perhaps at the start or early on in your career for procurement and supply, how CIPS professional qualifications will support you throughout a journey of learning, but also work, so that you can achieve that professional designation, MCIPS, and ultimately Chartered Professional. So what are CIPS professional qualifications going to really give you? When you look at the content for CIPS professional qualifications, it's broken down into a number of different modules. And those modules are really giving you an indication as to what the subjects that you will be studying. And you'll find there's a real balance of procurement and supply technical content. So you will see commercial negotiation, you will see sourcing, you will see things like contracting. But it's also balanced with some more general management skills that really complement the role and skill set of a procurement professional. So you'll see managing teams, managing individuals. You'll also see some project management. You'll also see strategy, so corporate strategy. You'll see leading and influencing depending on what level you're studying. So CIPS professional qualifications have got that balance of the procurement and supply technical skill set, but also complemented with that broader general management skill set. They're ultimately relevant for you in your role or aspiring to get into a procurement and supply role. And hopefully you'll hear a little bit more from Anna and Gareth about how CIPS qualifications have supported them in their roles. By studying the qualifications, you do have flexibility over the pace at which you can study, and there are a number of different study methods that you can choose. So you can actually have a look at your own circumstances, your professional circumstances, your personal circumstances, and you've got some choices to make about how you want to study and the pace at which you want to go. And I'll talk to you a bit about some considerations when making those decisions shortly. CIPS is regulated as an awarding body and a professional body, and what that means is that our qualifications are scrutinised to ensure that they are fit for the profession. They're fit for the profession today, but they're also fit for the future, as they reflect current practice, but also emerging practice and good practice. CIPS' role as a professional and awarding body for those qualifications is to work with the professions so that we know what the requirements of the profession are, what the competencies that professionals working in procurement and supply roles will need to use in order to do those roles. And as part of our role to support the profession, we take that information and we translate that into a suite of professional qualifications that are regulated by education regulators to ensure that they meet what you need, but most importantly, what your employers need, both current and future, and what the wider profession needs. And by choosing to study qualifications, you are actually demonstrating actively your commitment to furthering your proficiency. And really that is standing you in very good stead as a professional in procurement and supply management. So when you join CIPS as a student, just be aware that there's an awful lot of your resources that will be available to support you both in your role, but with your study. So you're going to be connected as part of a global network. That means you can tap into networks near where you live, perhaps in the sector in which you're working, but also much more widely, more globally as part of that global network, and tap into those from a knowledge share perspective, and also for picking up expert content through the events, the webinars and so on that our network runs. You're supported both by a professional community, but also CIPS as your professional body, ensuring that you have access to relevant resources and that we signpost information that's relevant for you. Hopefully by studying and achieving those qualifications, that will enable you to become successful, because you will be in demand as a procurement professional who has actually gone the extra mile and become professionally qualified, ultimately meaning that you're trusted to do your procurement role and operate and support and guide stakeholders within your business. I'm just going to move through and talk to you a little bit about the pathways that you can follow for CIPS professional qualifications. And again, hopefully you'll be able to relate these to your own professional circumstances and what you want to achieve to pick the right approach for you. Today, we're focusing very much on CIPS professional qualifications, which is the top pathway that you can see there. But there are some other pathways, namely our applied learning pathway and our experiential pathway. I think the important thing to remember is that no matter which pathway you follow, the standards which underpin those pathways are exactly the same, because ultimately MCIPS can only be awarded upon exhibiting a certain level of procurement and supply proficiency and also having that experience. So the standards are the same, but actually what happens and the experience is slightly different, and they're different according to your personal professional circumstances around which one would be best suited to you. So CIPS professional qualifications actually have 3 different points at which you can start your studies: the certificate in procurement and supply operations, the advanced certificate in procurement and supply operations, and then the diploma in procurement and supply. The diploma in procurement and supply is our highest entry point, and I have to say my experience in Australia and New Zealand tells me that the vast majority of students will start their studies at the diploma in procurement and supply. And I always recommend to those that are studying and they're a bit unsure around where to study, first check the entry requirements for each qualification, and they're available in the student zone on the CIPS website. But for the CIPS diploma, you need to hold either a Cert 4 level qualification or a Level 4 Australia or New Zealand qualification, or have 2 years relevant experience. So if you have either of those or both of those, you would be eligible to start in the diploma. Equally, if you don't feel you meet that criteria, have a look at the advanced certificate. That might be an appropriate starting point. And you might wish to compare between that and the certificate. And if you look at the module titles, if they kind of resonate with the sort of thing that you're doing in your role, chances are that that is appropriate as a starting point. If you do have any questions, by all means, contact us and our customer services team would be happy to advise and guide you. So the diploma qualification being the highest entry point, that really gives you an underpinning operational procurement kind of practice content and topics. So you'll explore the underpinning tools, theories, models to help you do your role in procurement and supply at an operational level. As you move through to the advanced diploma, that starts to be complemented with some more managerial aspects. So managing people in the first instance, managing teams, but also looking at managing contractual risk, managing supply chain risk. So that starts to then be a step up from the diploma, looking at that operational lens, through to looking at that managerial lens at the advanced diploma. Then you will progress on to the professional diploma, which really starts to layer in that much more strategic outlook. So you'll see, in addition to supply chain strategy, things like corporate strategy. You'll also see leadership and influencing. Within both the advanced diploma and the professional diploma, there are elective or optional modules. So actually you can pick from the different modules that are available to suit either your interests, or perhaps you might pick a module because you want to up your skill set to support your career aspirations. But ultimately, the diploma, all of the modules there are compulsory, so you don't need to worry about choosing anything then. You will follow a curriculum that's broken down into a number of different modules before hopefully moving through to the advanced diploma and then the professional diploma. Ultimately, once you've achieved the diploma, the advanced diploma, and the professional diploma, you're then eligible to apply for MCIPS. So make sure that you've got your 3 years experience in procurement and supply, and you will be eligible to upgrade to MCIPS, and that upgrade is free to apply for. And then provided you've got your ethical certificate and also your annual CPD requirement, you will immediately be available for Chartered Professional at that point. I'm just going to touch upon the global standard for procurement and supply. And if you cast your eyes towards the bottom of the screen, you will see some little icons talking about tactical, operational, managerial, and professional. Those are the competency descriptors from the global standard, which is a competency framework for procurement and supply management, which CIPS, very much supported by the profession, has designed and developed to really define the competencies that are required to operate in procurement and supply, from entry level, or that tactical level, right the way up through to professional level, and actually beyond MCIPS in that very senior strategic CPO space. So we consult annually with the profession on what those competencies should be and what those competency statements should be. And we use that information to translate that back into a curriculum of learning to help individuals that are aspiring to become fully qualified professionals work their way through different modules of study and achieve different qualifications along their pathway to becoming fully qualified as a procurement professional and ultimately holding MCIPS Chartered Professional. So I'm just going to touch upon some things that you might want to consider when you're making your choice around how you study, the pace at which you go, and so on. And I'm sure Anna and Gareth, who are going to be talking to you shortly, will certainly have some comments to make on this from their own learning. We've touched upon it already, but the first thing you probably want to iron out is where is the best starting point. So I would always recommend check the entry requirements, which are available on the website in the qualifications area in the student zone. Each qualification has its own entry requirements listed. As I've said, the diploma is the highest entry point. So actually arriving at a decision around where to start is a really, really good point for you to get bottomed out immediately. I think the second thing for you to consider is whether you have already achieved some relevant qualifications and you might be eligible for exemptions. So we do have an exemptions policy, a way for us to recognize your prior learning. And if you have achieved any relevant qualifications within the past 5 years, then you may well be eligible for exemptions. So again, check the exemptions area within the student zone. Have a look at the policy if you think you've got some relevant qualifications, and it will talk you through how to apply for those exemptions. And ultimately, that means you might well get qualified much quicker because you won't have to repeat learning that you've already achieved through those qualifications that you already hold. I think another question for you to consider is how are you going to go about planning your study? So again, look at those qualifications. Each one has a credit value. So in the case of the diploma qualification, that credit value is 60 credits. What a credit value is a way of describing the size of the learning. So 1 credit is equal to 10 learning hours. So a 60 credit qualification is actually 600 learning hours, which I'll be honest, sounds pretty daunting when you say it out loud, but don't forget, each qualification is broken down into a number of modules, and those modules have a credit value assigned to them to help you build up to achieve the whole qualification. So to achieve the diploma, you will have to study and achieve 60 credits, but that's broken down into 8 modules, of between 6 and 12 credits each. So that breaks the learning down for you. And then each module will have its curriculum laid out into a list of learning outcomes. So when you're thinking about planning your study, I strongly recommend you identify which modules you're going to study first. And again, we do have advice and guidance on how to select your starting point once you've got into your qualification and which module to go for first. And then figure out really, how am I going to do this? Am I going to be studying in my own time outside of work? Maybe I should talk to my work. Maybe they'll give me some release time, so some study time. But again, don't forget, CIPS is a professional qualification. So some of your learning will be 100% immediately relevant for you to use in your role as you work your way through. So some of that learning will be reinforced and facilitated through the day-to-day activities you're perhaps already doing in your role. So think about planning it, but also think about how you can get involved in different things within your role to actually start to put into practice some of what you're learning so that it's reinforced to ultimately prepare you for your assessments and your exams. I guess on that, another point to consider is what's the support available, and make sure you're fully aware of all of the different things that are available to support you. So there's an awful lot of support resources free for CIPS students, including all of the resources in the student zones. So there are exam techniques guides in there to help you prepare for your exams, things to think about when you're revising, for example. But equally, the knowledge resources have got an awful lot of resources that are available to help you when you're studying. What we've actually done to support our students is mapped the qualifications modules content through to identify relevant knowledge resources for each of those different modules. So as you're working your way through the module, you can actually dip into relevant knowledge resources to help you with your study. CIPS also provides available for sale learning resources, which are structured around the learning content for each of the modules. And those are available to buy from the CIPS website. And what you will see is the different study guides will have different prices according to which module and the size of the module that they're available for. So ultimately, a smaller 6-credit module, the learning resource will be cheaper than the 12-credit module learning resources because they are smaller and shorter and there's less learning in them. So again, check out that. There's also lists of recommended reading, which kind of signpost different resources that you might want to tap into. So some sample study texts that are available. You might well be able to access them through work libraries or more general libraries, online libraries, that kind of thing. So we do certainly signpost other relevant resources that aren't CIPS resources. Ultimately, part of your membership with CIPS, you will be engaged in lots of different forums, whether those are face-to-face through the events network, but equally and certainly increasingly in the current times, virtually. So do engage in the LinkedIn and social media forums. Check out CIPS YouTube. Strongly recommend, if you're not already, subscribe to the CIPS YouTube, because there's an awful lot of content in there that is well worthwhile checking out and relevant to your study. So there is an absolute wealth of information available to support you through your study. And don't forget to lean on those that support you in your own roles. So that might be your line manager, it might be a mentor, and so on. Ask their advice and hopefully get their support and buy-in for your study. And then really ultimately pace. How quick would you like to qualify? So some will have aspirations around, I'd like to qualify in the next 3 years. Others might project that out a bit further, 5 years, 6 years. Others might not really know. In my experience with qualifications, getting started is always the hardest part. And I know personally, I'm very good at coming up with 1,000,001 different reasons around, I won't study this month because I've got this going on, or maybe not this year because actually I know I've got to have to do that and I'm not necessarily going to have time. But ultimately, there never will be a good time in my experience. So once you get started, really figure out what that pathway looks like for you and make sure you call upon all of those different avenues for support. So all of those questions are really very, very individual, and the answer will be different compared from one student to another student. They're very, very personal depending on your professional circumstances and your personal circumstances. But ultimately, getting down those answers and understanding what that looks like for you will help you understand how much is this going to cost me. So just to give you a feel that studying the CIPS Diploma qualification will cost from $2,500, whether that's Australian or New Zealand. So that's rough indicative costs for the whole qualification, including your CIPS student membership, all of the exams that are there for each of the modules, and also the CIPS learning resources. What that doesn't include is the study centre support, so tuition and so on. So again, that is an important thing to factor in. So we're just going to look at what you could expect from a study centre if you choose to go through that route. You can choose to study under your own pace and under your own steam, really, as a self-directed learner. And we would typically classify that route as unsupported because there are no tutors to tap into to ask your questions, to gain clarification, to really hear from the benefit of their experience. Alternatively, CIPS has a network of study centres. They're all vetted by CIPS and approved by CIPS, and those that we approve, we issue our CIPS approved logo to. So if you're considering studying with a study centre, first thing you should do is check, are they approved? Check on the CIPS website. There's a study centre finder tool in the student zone where you can find study centres that are approved by CIPS to offer the CIPS qualifications. So when we vet those centres, we look at a number of things. We look at their tutors. Have they got expertise in procurement and supply management? Have they got expertise in being able to break down the learning so that students can absorb that learning and apply it both in their current roles, but also will be able to apply that in a variety of situations going forward? Ultimately, studying with a CIPS study centre may well mean that you have a better success rate because they'll be able to iron out any questions you have. You may well be able to qualify quicker because they will actually structure the learning so that all you have to do is get in, do the learning, follow their advice and guidance, complete the learning exercise that they will structure for you, rather than perhaps going through that self-directed learn approach where you're not necessarily always motivated to come home after a long day in the office, pick up the books and get going. Don't forget that that study centre will provide you with that student support. So they will plan and schedule your study time. They will plan and schedule your lessons. You will have access to knowledgeable tutors, those hopefully who have already had procurement roles and can share with you the benefit of their experience, ultimately complementing your learner experience and motivating you to progress through each module and on through your qualifications, ultimately to hopefully become qualified. And as I said, they'll be able to share their experience and hopefully support you so that your learning applies directly in your role at the moment, but also equip you so that your learning can be applied in future roles that you will hold going forward. So I think you've probably heard enough from me for now, but as I've said, we are taking your questions through our audience question at the end, so please do submit your questions. I'm just going to welcome to the session our panel experts. Anna Laity. Anna is partway through her qualifications, she's partway through the advanced diploma, and she's based in Christchurch in New Zealand. Gareth is also partway through qualifications, approaching the end of his qualifications journey, partway through the professional diploma. Gareth's based in New South Wales in Australia and works for Sydney Trains. So welcome, Anna, welcome, Gareth. Thank you for joining us today and agreeing to share the benefit of your experience from studying CIPS professional qualifications.
Sure. Sorry.
So,
right. So my name is Anna Laity, and as Charlotte's mentioned, I am partway through studying my diploma at present. I'm currently on the level 5, the advanced diploma. In terms of myself and my background, I actually joined supply chain about 10 years ago now in Australia. I entered through my work at the time in the Australian resources sector. So I worked for a number of mines and an LNG gas processing plant. I actually started off in administration and then quickly realised that there was a shortage of specialised skills to deal with a number of what I felt were fairly common sense factors in what we were doing within those industries. So I firstly got into sort of the logistics understanding. So in terms of understanding the movements of freight, whether it was consumables, so perishables, or materials for construction. I spent a good amount of time there before coming back to New Zealand, where I worked for a number of fairly major New Zealand organisations, PGG Wrightson, Dulux, and now I have been working with Christchurch Airport for just over 3 years. So my role is currently as the Senior Procurement Specialist for the airport. In my day-to-day, we see a vast number of requirements which we have to sort of be across in terms of procurement, but also having had that coming from that supply angle as well. So we obviously assist the airport in facilitating a number of its procurements in terms of capital projects, so that can include horizontal and vertical infrastructure. And then we also deal a lot in service contracts, as well as a few other bespoke requirements. So it's a very varied job, and it allows me, I guess, a very good range to be able to draw upon the skill set, which I have been currently learning and developing through the CIPS qualification. In terms of why I chose the study, it was actually something that I was unaware of when I was in Australia. And when I came back to New Zealand, I started seeing the requirements for jobs. People were asking for the qualification. So my employers, for example, at the airport, this was one of the criteria of the role that I took. They were actually after somebody who had MCIPS, but there was actually a shortage of people within the region that had that, so they opted to take me without it. And through my time here, I've obviously realised the benefit of MCIPS, and working with colleagues who also had the qualification, just kind of given me the kick I needed to formalise my knowledge, and then make sure as well that it was as complete as it needed to be. And I guess that kind of goes into why I found it valuable. So I obviously had a number of different skill sets that I had acquired in my time through Australia and New Zealand. And a number of them were complementary in some ways. So obviously the logistics, the materials management, supply chain risk, all of that sort of thing was covered off to a degree. I just didn't know how to articulate it in a way that other people would understand. And I wasn't sure how to, I guess, sort of apply my knowledge in other ways. And I did have a lingering suspicion when I came back to New Zealand that there were gaps in my knowledge, and that I wasn't potentially going to get as much opportunity in the New Zealand market as I would like to tap into those gaps by way of experience. So I decided that the best way to be sure that I addressed any shortcomings that I had, or any areas of lesser confidence in my knowledge, would be to engage in the study. And so that was pretty much my reasons for participating or signing up to do the study. And obviously it's had an impact on my work in terms of helping me sort of consolidate my knowledge, and sort of wrapping around a sort of more a holistic, like a wider context to what I'm doing in the scheme of what others are doing, what is best practice, what is the global standard, and helping me have some confidence that my knowledge and my skills were you know, exactly what they needed to be. And in fact, actually, I just needed to hone and refine what I had through the learnings in the books. And that has given me greater confidence to get through each of the qualifications, and in fact develop within my work as well. So actually within since studying, I've been promoted once, which, you know, is something that my management team had picked up on, that they had noticed and had queried a surge in confidence from myself, and perhaps like a slightly developed level of service for their stakeholders, which they recognised by way of a promotion. And I basically attributed that to the confidence gained from the qualification. So obviously I find it really valuable. I started my diploma last July. I think I can see some people asking around how long it takes to do some study and how long it takes you to work through the modules. So for me, I actually anticipated that I would be doing this across 3 years. I thought that I would be doing level 1 across a single year, level 2 across a single year, and level 3 across a single year. However, as I have been going, I've actually picked up pace a little bit, because I felt more confident every single time I sat a portion of exams, and every single time I got a little bit further, it kind of motivated me to do more. And actually that great feeling of, oh great, you know, I've just passed another 1 or 2 exams, led me to think, oh, maybe I should have done another, you know, maybe I had a bit more capacity than I realized, because I did fine on those other exams. So I've accelerated from when I've started my study through to this point. So here I am a year later, and I am essentially halfway through the qualification. My first exam session, I started off with a singular exam, and that was because I wanted to gauge how difficult it would be. I also, just as a tip, I decided to complete the modules in a sequence that felt right for myself. So I grouped together modules that I either felt to be really challenging with, so I may for example have grouped a challenging module with one that I felt would be slightly easier. And I also grouped together light topicked modules, so things that I felt might logically integrate, so that I felt more like I was studying maybe 1 module as opposed to 2. And then you do kind of see that when you're studying the content, you do see some cohesion in the documents across books, which helps with that kind of like that logical approach to sequencing your study. And in terms of my timeline for the future, so like I said, I started off with a single exam in July last year. In July this year, I will be doing 5 exams next month, which sounds like a lot, but it just comes from that place of personal motivation for me, of seeing the benefit of knowing I can do it, because I've had that year now to pick up my skill set and develop. So I think that probably backs up what Charlotte was saying around the flexibility and the timeline of your study is entirely dependent on you, and to give you some comfort as well. So I have been studying. I took up the study after the birth of my first child. So I have been studying whilst I have a toddler around me. So, and obviously working full time. So you can understand that it's all manageable and it's all comfortable when you arrange the study in a way that in a way that suits you. So that's really just that's my perspective on study, and I'm sure you can ask me any questions towards the end.
Cool. Anna, thank you so much. Really good overview of your career, but also why you chose CIPS Qualifications. And I do think that key takeaway around that confidence factor is something to not be underestimated around how that can really support your career development. Thank you. Don't go far, because we're going to bring you back in for the audience Q&A session. Gareth, welcome. I wondered if you could us a little bit about, your career highlights, where you're at in your role.
Yeah. So I'll firstly start by saying, I'm right at the end of the journey at the moment. Unfortunately, I've been lingering at the end of my journey for quite some time now. So I'm on the last exam on the professional diploma. I'll sort of go through in a minute sort of my career highlights and sort of why I took up study. But I think, as Anna said, the confidence thing is a big thing. It gives you more confidence that you actually know what you're talking about, I guess, and that you can actually take that into the workplace and actually start delivering some real value, that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So procurement really did find me. I started off as a tradie. I did an apprenticeship as an auto electrician. So then after that, I started work with the outsourced provider of fitment and defitment of police vehicles here in New South Wales. After a couple of months in that, I moved across into a quality assurance role for the customer, being the New South Wales Police. Essentially, it was a very operationally focused contract management role. A little bit time after that, after a bit of a trip around Europe, a bit of one of those things. So I applied for a cadet role at Department of Education with a very generic project support officer role, not really knowing exactly what the job entailed, but it turns out it was in their procurement area, and the rest is history now. So now I've got 8 years of procurement experience across New South Wales Police, Department of Education, TAFE New South Wales, Department of Justice, and now Sydney Trains. I've worked across a number of indirect and direct categories, as well as a number of category and supplier relationship management roles, as well as stints in procurement governance and e-procurement implementations. I'm now a contract delivery manager within Sydney Trains. I've been in the current team for nearly 3 years. The current role is contract management or supplier relationship management focused on the track discipline, mainly track maintenance services and track inventory supply contracts. I was a runner-up of the CIPS Young Talent Award in 2018 and 2019, and I joined the CIPS New South Wales branch committee in mid-2019. So throughout my career, I've invested heavily in continuing professional development with a number of diplomas in procurement and business-related studies. This really started in the second half of 2015. I started with the Australian-based diploma program with Academy Global. So that's, the Australian Qualifications Framework diploma program. Once I finished this, I moved on to the advanced diploma program within Australia, but also the CIPS diploma. So with the moving from the Australian-based into the CIPS diploma, you get a number of exemptions, and I believe that sort of program is still in existence today. So this was similar with the advanced diploma from the Australian-based into the CIPS advanced diploma. I received a number of sort of exemptions again, whereas with the professional diploma, there's sort of no equivalence level with diploma level offerings in Australia. So I've had to sort of go through the full exam studies for that for the professional diploma. At the time I started my continuing professional development pathway, I was in a rotation program throughout the different category teams at Department of Education. I wanted to supplement my on-the-job training, learn more about the technical or theoretical components and plug the gaps in my knowledge. It really did start to stitch together my bubbles of knowledge that I developed, and I strongly believe that the investment in academic studies has supported me in my success to date. I personally am a person that prefers group learning, not only for the networking aspect, but it keeps me engaged. Otherwise I start to get distracted. The group discussions obviously is often the most valuable piece. It's for this reason that I found the CIPS qualifications pathway. Look, a bit of a challenge at times. Obviously, being in the procurement industry, it's long days and stuff like that, and motivating yourself outside of hours can be challenging at times. But fortunately myself, I do have a bit of a commute to work, so I use that opportunity to study on the train to and from work or in the evenings and stuff like that. I haven't yet undertaken an exam underneath the new qualification system, but in my revisions and studies so far for the July exam periods, the syllabus appears to be more, relevant to the Australian or worldwide sort of environment opposed to just UK focus. So it really seems to be a good step forward. I believe all procurement practitioners should continually invest in themselves. It's really important to have a solid knowledge foundation of knowledge so you can have meaningful conversation with stakeholders and understand or explain the why rather than just quoting the procurement process, which we in procurement are really good at. I believe and am hopeful that potential employers recognise the level of assurance that MCIPS offers. If nothing else, it shows a level of commitment from the individual to themselves and the profession. So since I've sort of started my continuing professional development pathway in the second half of 2015, I've been promoted 4 times. So it really does give me more confidence in the workplace and actually stitching together that theoretical stuff. And then you know, as you get more experience and then doing the doing, and then more theoretical type knowledge, yeah, it's been really helpful to me.
Sure.
So that's me.
Thank you, Gareth. Again, really helpful overview, and it's really interesting how you've had actually very different career paths, both of you, and different exposure into different kind of sectors, and yet the CIPS qualifications have kind of helped you from that confidence perspective, and they've been able to be applied in your different roles. And I think that really speaks to the value of the CIPS professional qualifications being that global qualification designed to really equip individuals with the stuff they need to know to get on and do their procurement roles and hopefully have a really satisfying, fulfilled career in procurement and supply. Thank you, both of you. What we're going to do is really start to take some questions from our audience now. So just give me a moment while I read through what we have. I'll perhaps take the first one, which is asking around CIPS as an RTO. Is CIPS an RTO in Australia? So an RTO, for those of you that aren't familiar, in Australia are registered training organisations. CIPS is not an RTO because CIPS, we set the qualifications, we provide the assessment, and we award the qualifications, but we work with a network of training providers and approve them as CIPS study centres, and they're the ones that will do the teaching and the delivery. So CIPS isn't an RTO. But I mentioned a study centre we have in Australia. They're approved for delivery in Australia, and they also provide distance learning for New Zealand. Actually, Gareth, I think you studied with them. That's Academy Global, and you'll find them on our website. Academy Global is an RTO, and we also are working with other providers in our network to build a network to support our students. So we've got a question around, on average, how long each qualification takes to finish. And I know, Anna, both yourself and Gareth have kind of talked about your experiences. And I think really what's important for our audience to take away is that it really does depend. I could talk to you about averages, and they'd be very much from a global average perspective. In my experience, people will take between 12 and 18 months to achieve a qualification. That's typically self-study. With a study centre support, depending on how they schedule the learning, that can be much quicker. You know, you can get through that 8 months in a qualification. So again, also will depend on the extent to which your role, you're working in procurement, or are you actually studying full-time, that kind of thing. So I guess that resonates with the both of you, because I know you also liaise with other CIPS students. Yeah, so colleagues and other people I've met have taken an accelerated pathway like Anna, like a bit of a sucker for punishment, and really got in there and thought, well, let's get stuck in. Some of them have undertaken something like 4 exams at a time, and Anna's doing 5. The most I've ever done is, I think, 2 successfully, if that makes sense, like passing them both. But that's because I was doing other qualifications like in parallel as well, and obviously also keeping a full-time job. But you know, it's each to their own as to how much they want to put in and how quickly they attain their certain qualifications. But for myself, the max I ever did was 2 at once, and I mean, I've been going so far nearly 4 years, I think. But as I said, nothing the last 2 years. I've been sort of stalling at the last hurdle, so to speak.
Yeah, and for me, my original study plan sort of hinged off of the idea under the old syllabus of doing, say, 1 exam every session, which was 1 exam every 2 months. But since the new qualifications come out, again, like Charlotte was mentioning, having some qualifications being quicker and some of the exams being longer in length. It really depends. If you're going to group together the short ones, then you can get through them faster, which is kind of where my 5 exams is coming in, albeit there is a long one in there. So in terms of but how I tend to do it is that the exam sessions are offered every 2 months. So when I tend to do it, I tend to work out what I've got in those 2 months coming up, and how many books I can physically read within that window. So I tend to work backwards. I take the books, I work out how many chapters are in each and how much I would have to read each week in order to fully have read and understood the books. And that's the guidance. That's basically how I structure my exams. And I generally find 2 is a very comfortable number of the new syllabus, especially where you've got some of those shorter qualifications in there, but you could start out slower and then work up to that. And 3 as well can be really manageable as well if it's 3 shorter modules.
Yeah, great, really good tips, thank you. I've got a question here. Does this mean if study is self-directed that there is no available support? I'll perhaps take that and then just invite you guys maybe to comment if you will. So there is no teaching support available under a self-directed learning or a self-study route. But of course you do have access to all of the CIPS knowledge resources, the learning resources and so on, but there's no one there really to structure your learning for you and plan it for you. You would need to do that yourself. And equally, you don't have a tutor that you can say, hey, I've read this. Is this the right way to interpret that? So you might find yourself leaning on colleagues, and that's fine if you've got that available for you, or you might find leaning on those in the CIPS network as an option there for you. But some people really value having a tutor that they can just check in, iron out those wrinkles, crack on with the study. I don't know if you guys got anything to comment on that.
Yeah, well, so especially within New Zealand, I'm sure it's the same within Australia. So our committees, of which there is one in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, they're all comprised of people that have gone through or are going through the study. And so there is a lot of there's a big support network there, especially, for example, for Christchurch, which obviously can facilitate queries from people outside of Christchurch as well. In terms of having a student base that regularly talks and discusses, you know, their learnings and their takeaway from the materials. So there is support in the sense that you can obviously still reach out and communicate with other students, such as myself. I'm not through a study centre. I'm doing it myself, and as Gareth mentioned, there is different ways to do things. And for me, that was just the way that gave me the greatest flexibility. But there's always people that have always been willing to share knowledge with CIPS, which I think is where your support could come from.
Yeah, I mean, on the same line, there is people that are around that have done it before and always willing to have a conversation with you and stuff like that. So that kind of support. But as Charlotte said, there's not so much sort of like a teaching support like you're going to school or university. That kind of sort of tutorial sort of teacher aspect, but there is now emerging the study centre type of learning, which if it was around when I was doing it, absolutely I would have gone for it, because that's where I sort of prefer, opposed to self-directed. You're sort of left to your own devices, and as Charlotte said before, make excuses about why you should defer starting opposed to getting on with it.
Yeah, got a couple of questions, one around the experiential requirement and one around the costs. I'll just perhaps quickly answer some of these in the interest of time. So I noted that for MCIPS, 3 years experience is required to apply for and achieve MCIPS. So what nature and level of procurement experience is required? So the experiential requirement for MCIPS is 3 years experience in procurement and supply in a position of responsibility. So it would be pretty much at the same level at which your professional diploma learning is pitched. But of course you can accrue that experience throughout your study. So it's not, I've achieved the qualifications and now I've got to get my experience. You can absolutely achieve that throughout your study. So hopefully that addresses that question. And then what have we got? Some are there any primary employers that value MCIPS from the public sector? I don't know if you guys, I know Anna, you've said that you started seeing CIPS as a requirement when you returned to New Zealand. Gareth, I don't know if you've any experience of seeing CIPS.
It's starting to pop up a lot more on job advertisements and stuff like that. A lot of them, it's not deemed mandatory, which I kind of agree with at this stage. I wouldn't say it needs to be mandatory, but it's always worded highly preferential or desirable. I'm seeing a lot more. The questions mainly around, is it primarily employers in the public sector? Yeah, I tend to only look at the moment sort of job roles in the public sector, so that's really all I can comment on. But I do know that it's gaining sort of momentum as well in the private sector as well.
Yeah, sure.
And within the region that I reside in Canterbury, it's a mix. So, and that's as a result of employers becoming aware of the requirements through their other through competitors, and thinking, oh well, if I'm going to compete with my peers, then I need to have as skilled a people as they are. So it's equal within Christchurch. You get a lot of private organisations starting to ask about it.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I had a question around, are the modules enough to prepare for the exams? I'll just perhaps comment on kind of what's available and what the recommended approach is. So each module will have a credit value, which is either 6 credits or 12 credits. A 6 credit module is around 60 hours of study, and 12 credit is 120 hours of study. But don't forget that study might be time you spend reading the learning resources. It might be e-learning, it might be dipping into the other CIPS knowledge resources, it might be tutor class time or distance learning, and equally it might be, gosh, I've just learned about this thing, I'm going to apply it in my role. So actually while you're working, you're using that and reinforcing the learning. We certainly recommend wider reading rather than just using the CIPS learning resources. And those that are registered with a CIPS study centre could expect their study centre to provide them with additional resources and signpost other areas to read. It's definitely worthwhile staying up to date with what's going on in the news that can affect the profession. And there's loads of great case studies out in the wider news in both Australia and New Zealand around procurement in action, particularly at the moment with COVID. Guys, I don't know if that kind of resonates with your experience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, for the modules were all I used. So I didn't necessarily do a lot of that wider reading, and I found that they were more than enough. There's really good things within the modules. So they go into things like case studies, which help embed the knowledge. So they give you the information, but then it sinks in when you read the case study and you can see how it's applicable. And even then, sometimes I Googled the case studies and learned a little bit more around them, but I definitely felt that they were sufficient on their own.
Yeah, I feel that too. Definitely sufficient. Like always, you get all the CIPS newsletters like every day, and it's got topical type things. I always read that, and they always relate to different areas of your study or your job. So in terms of theoretical preparation, yeah, the modules are enough, but I'm always reading other things. Assist.
Sure, cool, thank you. So we've had a question around how are exams done with the current COVID-19. I'll perhaps take that, guys, if that works for you. So obviously we are monitoring the advice of governments, and we are strictly following the advice of governments with respect to the conduct of our exams. So you can be rest assured that we're operating within those guidelines. The next exams take place in July. At the moment, in both Australia and New Zealand, those will take place as computer-based exams as planned in our exam centres. But we're constantly in touch with our students to advise and guide them if things change, because I'm sure you'll appreciate no one is in control of this. Within the exam centres themselves, they are absolutely taking measures around cleanliness, sanitisation, etc., that are part of the government guidance. Students can take sanitizer, for example. You can wear a mask if you wish to. I know in the UK, they must wear a mask according to government guidelines for any exams in July. So it's very circumstantial, and we are continuing to watch it, and we'll certainly advise any students entered for exams in July of what the best practice is and what to expect. Don't forget, because exams are confidential, that in an exam room, you're never going to be seated close to one another. So there will be that social distancing enforced anyway, because it's part of a confidential exam environment. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say we get semi-regular updates for students studying enrolled for exam periods. So yeah, we're getting that information. I don't feel too worried about it. You know, it's reassuring, comforting, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, and I think there's a question on costs and how much it's going to cost. So again, if you're going to study with a study centre, and certainly if you're thinking about studying, definitely get in touch with relevant study centres. They'll be available in the study centre finder in the student zone on the CIPS website. Ask them how much and make sure you check what's included. But as a baseline, the costs are for your CIPS student membership. So that's an annual subscription fee. The costs for your exams. So that's an exam registration fee for each of your exams and any that you need to resit. Also with the exam venue fee. And then there's also costs for the learning resources that you buy to support you. And again, it all depends on which combination of resources you buy. But there is an ebook and an e-learning for each module. The content is slightly different and they're very much designed for the e-learning to complement the ebook. That ebook is available as a hard copy format, as a physical study guide, which at the moment, there's a bit of disruption, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, in the distribution channels. So we're strongly recommending the ebook and e-learning, and there's actually a promotion on at the moment. If you buy the ebook and e-learning combination, there's actually 50% off the ebook. So learning resources, New Zealand dollars, it's $40 for a 6-credit module, 80 for a 12-credit module. And that's an ebook or an e-learning. And obviously if you combine them, then you get that 50% discount. For Australia, it's $35 for the 6-credit and $75 for the 12-credit. But again, as I said earlier, kind of all in for your student membership, your exams and your learning resources, you're looking at an investment of around $2,500 for, say, 12 to 18 months, depending on how fast you study, depending on the number of resits that you do, and depending on the learning resources. But check with your study centres. Obviously, they'll provide tuition, which you can expect to pay for, but they often include the exams in the price. And of course, they'll do the booking and the admin and the planning for you, so that might save you time. So again, really look at the value you're getting from a study centre before you kind of rule things out on a cost-only basis. And much of that would be positive from a tax perspective. Bear in mind, it is the season as we're approaching the end of the financial year as well. And we do know that a number of employers would be willing to sponsor. Some sponsor upfront and will cover the cost of things. Some will say once you've achieved or passed that exam, we'll refund and we'll give you the cost of those exams. So again, talk to your HR, talk to your line manager and see what they're willing to do to support you with your professional development, because it's in their interest, because they get more capability, more competence, as well as your own. So guys, I guess we'll wrap up now. But before we kind of do, just any final thoughts on how the quals will benefit you in the long term?
You want to go first, Anna?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess it just sort of goes into what a summary of what I was saying earlier, which is knowing for a fact that the qualifications and my knowledge as a result of studying the qualifications is best practice. It's knowing that my peers and I are at an equal standing once we've achieved the MCIPS mark. So it's understanding how how others, how their knowledge structure must be, and being able to, I guess, compete in terms of my knowledge with them. So in terms of my career, being able to, say, confidently apply for future jobs, and or having the confidence to sort of stand up alongside some of those people that have MCIPS, for example, and say voicing an opinion or steering a stakeholder, whatever it is. I just think that that's the sort of thing that that CIPS and MCIPS will have helped me with.
Yeah, and Anna's absolutely right. I think I've had a steeper trajectory in my career based upon my experiences with continuing professional development. Just gives me that more rounded knowledge and capabilities to apply in different scenarios that I'm faced with in different roles I undertake. It's been highly valuable. The return on investment for me and the cost benefit, absolutely worth it for sure. I think my employers along the way have also seen that an improvement in my performance due to extra knowledge, of course.
Great, thank you. So you'll see on your screens now there's a voucher code for those who were former members or indeed interested in joining CIPS as a student. You can rejoin or join and use a voucher code to waive the joining or registration fee. So you just pay the subscription. That voucher code is valid from tomorrow until the end of June. So Anna, Gareth, thank you, both of you. If you guys watch on your screens, you'll just see some information about up and coming webinars that are being hosted both by our Australian volunteer community and our New Zealand volunteer community. All information available in the events section on our website, www.cips.org. Anna, really appreciate you giving up your time this afternoon in New Zealand time. Gareth, really appreciate you giving up your lunchtime, Australian time. It's been really rich, thought-provoking stuff from the both of you. I've certainly learned a lot from you sharing your experience. So thank you for taking the time to share your experience with our audience today. Guys, please complete the post-webinar survey. We'd love to hear from you. And we will also be making a recording of today's session available for you. So thanks again and all the best. Bye-bye.